hope you have a beverage of your own. This is gonna be a special one. 3 strikes. 3 whole strikes in 9 months. That's special. At the beginning of 2020, we had a set release in, the Vanguard TCG, which was the second V-Series Bermuda set. This set, I keep procking Siri every time I make a video, but this set was initially seen as pretty cool. It supported some of the old archetypes, such as, Coral and Riviere and stuff like that, only to then find out that Riviere was overwhelmingly powerful compared to everything else that had come out at that time, and it just kind of felt like a repeat of what had happened the last year, where Bermuda felt like it was completely overwhelming everything else, and the format had to be creeped to Bermuda standards. Now, on top of that, Vanquisher was seen as a very strong deck that could actually fight against Riviere because of all the binding it had, the multi-attacks it had with the multiple Choos and stuff like that. Now, at the beginning of the year, before COVID exploded and, did all its crazy stuff to the world, we were, of course, still planning to have tournaments, and then Bushiroad released a kind of restriction list to restrict not only Riviere, who was seen as a very dominant force in the Japanese events, but also restrict Tachikaze, that has been ripping up tournaments left and right through its high roll, Murakumo, which was seen as one of the most dominant decks for the last half a year, Lukier, which just won Worlds as well, and so the whole format just kind of got crushed, snapped just like that, and the new decks were kind of seen as the new forefront. Now, when they did this restriction list, Bushiroad sincerely apologized in their usual kind of PDF file that they attached to these restriction lists, saying that, not only the immense power creep of the format was, pushing players away from the game, but the fact that with almost every new set that was releasing, it felt like there was a new best deck. You were either playing Bermudas, and then you were playing, Kagero or Messiahs, and then you were playing Eradicators, and then you were playing Shadows, or Lukier, or Hyuga, and then that set was actually, it was pretty crazy how every single deck in that set was very amazing. And then you were playing Tachikaze, and it just kept going on and on and on, and we had like the one exception of BT07, and that was it. And so every single time it just felt like the next set brought in the next powerhouse, and while they were kind of similar in power, so you could choose which one to play, it did feel like it was just like a whole nother level of the meta, and so the decks that came out before those sets weren't too great. Now, Bushiroad issued a formal apology and also said that they're going to do their best to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that this level of power creep doesn't happen again, this level of like, here's a new best deck every set level doesn't happen again. Now, so that was the first strike. That was the first time, and when that happened, a lot of people went, that's okay, you guys messed up, it happens, there's been plenty of times where, there was like a deck that was just a bit too crazy, and you guys had to nerf it. It's fine, we understand. You also rebalanced the meta, like Standard was completely rebalanced in a lot of people's eyes because all the problem decks were just being hit, and so people felt it was still okay, it's okay, we can still work with this. The second strike was not so apparent if you only play Standard, because the second strike was Zazan. Zazan was seen, so quick context, if you're kind of new to Vanguard, Premium is more of a Western format. It's not played that much in Japan. The general player base in Japan plays Standard because most events are Standard, and they kind of just prioritize Standard because it's easier to find players. Now, Premium is very much played in the West, in Europe, America, Asia in general, like Australia, everywhere else outside of Japan, it's quite popular. And so Premium Collection was being revealed. I already did a whole video on Zazan. Those of you that watched that know what I'm about to say, but Zazan broke the format. And there was no tournaments, because by the time Zazan came out, it was already COVID. All tournaments had been cancelled, all events had been cancelled, there was no way to actually gather results to prove that Zazan was an issue. Instead, everyone had to send in, the fans, the players, had to send in all their data about this deck, about this card, about the variants of the deck with Zazan in them, and they basically just had to push it down Bushiroad's throats until they said, limited to 1. Because the community said so. So that wasn't something that like came out of Japan. Japan only caught on to it very late, but it was something that like the Western community, by just screaming and tossing and turning for basically 3 months, managed to actually make a change. Now, Premium's been pretty fun ever since. However, that was a second strike. And that was the moment when people started asking, does Bushiroad R&D know what they're doing right now? and I'm going to talk about this a bit later. But this was the first time where I think we started seeing the meme of like, there's like some board game called We Didn't Playtest This at All, and I've seen Japanese people posting that a fair bit lately, where it's just like Bushiroad R&D, we didn't playtest this at all. And so that was the second strike. So then people were like, okay, you guys messed up with standard, that's okay, that was mostly power creep. But then you literally feels like you didn't playtest premium at all. Look at the crazy decks that were created thanks to Zazan. You know, this wouldn't have been the case if it was properly tested. And now we get on to the third strike, which was very recent, and that is Luard. So Luard was very hyped. You know, Shadow was always hyped. Luard was a very popular unit in the G era. You know, it was a very cool deck, had a lot of like cool stall builds, it had a lot of different builds, it just evolved all the time, and it was always meta relevant. It was always like tier 1 or tier 2, always seen as like a deck you could bring into any tournament and do pretty consistently well with, because that's what Luard was. It was expensive, but it was good. So when Luard was coming to standard, everyone was excited. It was also in the same set as Phantom Blaster Overlord. Phantom Blaster Overlord got some new cards revealed, which said that you can superior ride Phantom Blaster Dragon from your deck on turn 2. And you know, I was like, ooh, that's pretty cool. That lets you use the PBO skill earlier. And then they realized it's not restricted to Phantom Blaster decks. You can play that in Luard. Luard requires grade 3s for its skill. Boy, it would sure be a shame if you had 2 grade 3s in your soul on your first drag driver turn. And that's what people did. So Luard was, I think, the nail in the coffin for a lot of people. They were like, this is insane. Like, how could you like forego such a simple mistake of just printing something so stupid, you know, something that is clearly so abusable, something that is clearly like way ahead of every other deck. You know, we sometimes make jokes that Shirayuki is a 2020 card printed, you know, ahead of her time, but this Luard build is like a 2023 deck printed way ahead of its time. You know, I don't think that Vanguard's gonna reach that level of power that like the unnerfed Luard was for quite a few good years, but it's just insane. Like, and everybody was up in arms. Events, people weren't showing up to them because Japan actually resumed events the moment this set came out. And like, we saw plenty of tournaments of like all top 8 Luard or all top 4 Luard, and it was just insane. It's all like the same list of just running the superior ride engine in Luard and just overwhelming your opponent. Then of course they had a DLC strike with the whole George Aquaforce card that created an infinite loop in premium that they errata'd pretty quickly without the set actually releasing. But that was, again, these two instances made not just the Western community but the Japanese community just go like, is Bushiroad Research and Development actually playtesting this game? And so ever since that fiasco, Bushiroad has actually opened up and hired, or started hiring, part-time playtesters. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit of trivia about this. Back when they used to have part-time playtesters back in the day, this was in Break Ride format, Chaos Breaker was being developed. And as we all know, Chaos Breaker, a very, very powerful card, you know, kind of just took the format by storm when it first came out, and every time Chaos got support, it was insane and brought the deck back on a completely new power level, etc., etc. But when Chaos Breaker was first being designed, one of the playtesters leaked the effect. And it was leaked online, and people saw it, but everyone thought, psh, nah, this is way too good, there's no way this is real. Unless, and then it actually released. And that playtester had leaked it, and what do you know, Bushiroad never hired playtesters again, it seems, ever since then, until now. So it looks like ever since then, until like somewhere into the V-Series, Bushiroad actually made a nice internal research and development. So playtesters normally are internal Bushiroad employees. You know, they're the people that work for Bushiroad, they playtest the cards and the combos, etc. But now they're basically relying on external power again to help prevent these issues, especially going into Overdress. These new hires won't actually fix anything coming up in, you know, the V-Series for the last few sets of V-Series that are coming up. But once we get into Overdress next year, those playtesters will have been part of it. And, you know, they are probably going to be playing with those new Overdress cards very soon under tight NDAs, non-disclosure agreement, by the way, not Nintendo Direct announcement. I saw that tweet, it was so good. But those players are going to be helping to make sure that the new standard or whatever, you know, whatever happens with Overdress will be a good format, a healthy format, and I sincerely hope that is the case. Now, I'd like to also give you some reasons why. So I just listed things so far. We're 10 minutes into the video. All I've been doing is listing things that I'm sure a lot of you already knew about. So why are these 3 mess ups so important? So obviously Bushiroad has messed up in the past. This is not news to anyone. You know, Bushiroad has printed unfair cards, Bushiroad has emergency banned cards, Bushiroad, well, not banned, but emergency restricted cards, and, you know, just like being kind of hasty with, like, you know, undoing their mistakes, let's put it that way. So, you know, we had the case last year with Premium. The new Ishikishima got banned within like 2 months of being released, you know, and things like that, which clearly felt like an oversight of like its own power level. But then like before the V series, these restrictions, sure, we had restriction lists pretty often, but they would often only hit decks that were actually seen as problematic, or strategies that were clearly problematic. Like, making Refros being a one-of is definitely seen as fair, because Refros made an unfair game state where the games took too long and led to just games going into timeout. And then, you know, nerfing the Elite Four back in the day in the G series when Time Leap was dominating everything for over a year, of course, was also seen as justified, because that was the best deck of the game for a very long time. And sure, it shared that best deck status with decks like Nitros and, you know, 7Cs, but it still was like an insanely good deck for an insanely long time. And then on top of that, you know, 7Cs, don't get me started, that felt like a mistake in its own right. And, you know, same with Odysseus, that sure, those got hit, but they also presented playstyles that felt at the very least like, you know, they didn't feel, okay, 7Cs did feel completely absurd, let's not kid ourselves here, but, you know, with Ripples, it was like a fun thing to watch it just kind of do crazy things for a little bit, and then it just got hit, you know. So they've made mistakes in the past, but why do these mistakes feel so much worse? I think if I give you a comparison of, imagine that Ripples, 7Cs, and New Ishikishima all happened within the time frame of 9 months. How crazy is that, you know? Think about that for a moment. Imagine all three of those things happened within a time frame of 9 months. Like, let's say 3 months apart from each other. Isn't that kind of insane? You know, we think about those like crazy decks that got restricted in the past, but those were like a hiccup that would happen once a year at most. And, you know, they kind of got solved over time, or, you know, they just got restricted. But these were just hiccup after hiccup after hiccup, and the player base was just not having it. And so the player base, not only, you know, are they not happy with the fact that these decks are so insane, a lot of people are also not happy that, like, oh, you know, VBTO8 just felt like it was way ahead of everything. VBTO9 also ahead of everything, even ahead of Messiahs, which they just, you know, which was like the benchmark of ahead of everything. So now it's like, it kind of feels like the repeat of last year, where it's like we had Bermudas, that was ahead of everything, and then everything printed after Bermudas kind of matched it in power. So now we have Messiahs, everything that comes after Messiahs matches it in power level. So it's like, it feels like there's just a wave of power. Every time they're just like doing a wave of power, which, you know, sure, this isn't a rotating format yet, but if it is, that's completely ridiculous. You know, there's no point to be power creeping if a format potentially might rotate in the future. So sure, I understand that Bushiroad wants to sell product, but it's like, must you go to such lengths? That is kind of the question I'm asking here. But so a lot of players are losing trust in Bushiroad as a company due to the way that they've been treating their best card game, Vanguard, in recent years, ever since the reboot started, basically. And they started this journey of nostalgia is the best, nostalgia will bring back people, nostalgia will give us money, you know. It don't work like that. You're not Charizard, but that's a different video for a different time. But I want to give you another interesting thing. So, more pieces of trivia that maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but when the reboot was announced in the beginning of 2018, Bushiroad did a very big presentation about it, and one of the things they did, which I always found interesting or remarkable, I guess, was that when they announced the reboot, they called in, like, I think it wasn't the CEOs of all the big card shop chains in Japan, but like representatives, managing representatives from every single big card shop chain in Japan, that basically pledged their support for Vanguard for the coming years and said, we will support Vanguard, we will do tournaments, we will do this, you know, support both formats, blah, 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 all this stuff. And now, after the Luard fiasco, one of those chains, they didn't say they stopped stocking or hosting Vanguard, but one of their branches in Osaka said, we will not be doing anything with Vanguard anymore. No more sales, no more purchases, no more tournaments. And that's when I, like, all of this happening, I was like, okay, you know, this is just the community exploding as usual, you know, it's normal. But when a big card shop chain, Big Magic, does that, I was like, you know, that might be just one shop, But that is kinda yikes, especially in Osaka, where sure there's quite a few card shops, but it's not as much as in Tokyo. So it's like you have a fair bit of choice, but Big Magic is a place a lot of people go to regardless. So it's like, this ain't good. So you might think, why did that happen? Well, part of the Luard fiasco. Now this kind of, you have to understand how buying and selling cards works in Japan. I did a video about that, but if you don't have time to watch it, TLDR is, you open boxes, you take the stuff you want, the stuff you don't want, you give to the shop. You sell it to the shop for the price that they say. Nobody, okay, not nobody, but most people in Japan don't sell between people. Like, it's not normal to just like post on Facebook like we do, or post on like Card Market or TCG Player like people in the West do. You just sell it to the shop, they give you money for your cards, and then they resell the cards that you sold to them to other players. So it's just a buying and selling cycle endlessly. Every single card game does it like that in Japan. That is a system. So what happened in Japan is that VBT 10 comes out, Luard is insane, everybody's opening crazy amounts of boxes, the set sells out, and of course, you know, Luard goes from being more expensive to dropping, but still being pretty high in price because Nemain is super expensive. So Nemain is like a card that all the card shops went, we're buying your Nemains, if you have Nemains to sell, just like, we're buying your Nemains because we can sell those Nemains back to every single player that wants to play Luard, because it's a must, it's a staple at the time before being restricted. So these card shops, they were saying like, we'll pay $50 for your Nemain, just sell us your Nemain, we'll pay $50 for it, or whatever price they said, right? And like, these prices changed every day. They would go up, down, go up and down, depending on what tournaments are happening. And all these shops said, we're buying your Nemains. And, you know, whereas like all the stuff from the actual set, the Luard stuff, was just kind of staying there at like the usual price, but it was being bought out very quickly. So a lot of people were building that deck, they were looking at the deck, picking up brand wins, picking up like everything about the deck, you know? And then, so they paid so much, they spent so much money buying up the Nemains, and sure, they managed to sell a lot of them too, but what about shops that bought up a bunch of Nemains but didn't sell that many? Nemain gets hit. Price appreciates like crazy. Sure, you can still play it in non-Luard decks, but Luard is the main spice here. Luard is the main selling factor. So for some shops, they can just get fed up. They're like, we just lost so much money trying to, like, you know, just by doing the thing that we always do. Like, this has been a standard for Japanese card business for years, and I mean years, dozens of years, for as long as the card game business has been alive, since Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon TCG back like 20 years ago. This has been a case. So, you know, they just did the thing they usually do, and Bushiroad just went like, sorry, no, you can't, sorry about that, our bad, we apologize, this won't happen again. Every time they say, this won't happen again. Swear to God, it better not. But, so a lot of card shops, they just went like, well damn, like now we're being kind of like, you know, done in by Bushiroad too. It's not just the players, because, you know, we spend so much money picking up these cards that players want, that are hot on the market, and suddenly we just get hit. You know, imagine if like the Denny GX in Pokemon suddenly got banned when all the shops have been safely buying them from players for years now. Or like Crobat V or something, you know? But no, it's like, this just is not a good look for Bushiroad in many aspects, and it's important to understand that. So like, these 3 strikes of just mess ups in the research and development, they go far beyond just consumerism, just like for player enjoyment. They have applications for the community, but also for the business, for the card shops that are supporting their product, that pledged their support at the beginning of the reboot to support their product. I don't think they're going to be pledging their support as enthusiastically going forward if this is the kind of treatment they might expect to get in the future. So I think a lot of people are looking at Bushiroad with a little bit of skepticism, and while Bushiroad has been doing a lot of good this year, they've been responding to players perfectly. So like, this restriction happened very quickly, Zazen happened very quickly with no tournaments, and like, there's a lot of good things that I'm going to make a video about this too, like the good things that Bushiroad has done too, because they also, like, all these recent sets have gone out of stock completely nationwide super quickly. But Bushiroad was like, okay, we'll reprint them. You know, and like all these things that they get called out for, Bushiroad was like, okay, let's fix it now. You know, they just kind of quickly patch things up, but they need to, first and foremost, patch that goddamn R&D up. And I don't know who's in there, but please, for the love of God, just teach them how to properly design effects. You know, I'm not somebody that works for, I am a researcher, but not for cards. You know, so I can't develop these effects, but at the very least. I mean, we had amazing R&D teams in the past. Like, look at, like, literally the middle of G all the way until GBT12. It was pretty amazing. Sure, ZRs came in and changed everything, but you know, we've had good patches. It just feels like the team ever since ZR has kind of changed, and they've been kind of going with the same design philosophy ever since. But anyway, I think that's going to be it for this video. There isn't really much else I wanted to mention about this whole 3 strikes fiasco, but hopefully you guys enjoyed what I had to say today. It was very like whiny, ranty video, but I wanted to get it out there. I wanted to talk about it. I think Yellowcard Vanguard also spoke about it. He had a whole script. I've been just like freestyling this whole thing, but you can check out Yellowcard's video about this as well. I think it definitely kind of like pinpoints some of the other issues, that also the same issues that are being spoken about right now. But on that note, that's gonna be it for me today as usual, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.